Okay. Oh, I think we have audio working from my end now. Oh, this is Brian. Can you hear me?
We can, Brian.
Okay. Having technical difficulties, so got them sorted-ish. Are we waiting on anybody else? Let's see here. We have. We have Jose or Jennifer.
They aren't on yet.
No. Did we hear from them at all, Ebony, or
I've heard from Jennifer.
Sandra is.
Jennifer said that she would be present a few days ago.
Okay.
I'm not sure about Jose.
Okay. I don't know. Let me see if I can get a hold of Jose, because I don't know if we can technically proceed with only two of us. we have anybody sitting in for Jerry from legal for this? They would know how many members we actually need present to proceed.
I could see if I can get him on the phone real quick.
Because I'm not sure if we need two suffices or not, or if we have to have three.
Hey, John, give him a call. He may be, or he could put one of his folks on, or he'll be able to answer really quickly. I reached out to Jose and Jennifer as well, Brian. I haven't heard.
Yeah,
from
I reached
them.
out to Jose. I haven't heard back. I haven't called Jennifer yet, so I won't since you did.
John's about to call Jerry now to confirm.
Once we get an answer from Jerry, I can try and call Sandra, and she might be available again by now.
Jennifer will be joining shortly, everybody.
Thank you. Hello, Jose.
Hello, sorry I'm late. I've been in and out all day. Both my wife and my daughter came down with COVID this week.
Oh, I'm sorry. That sucks.
Yeah, my daughter's got it. She's pretty sick.
Oh, that's not fun.
No, it's not. But I am here.
Oh, thank you. Sandra ended up delayed last minute. So like, we're not sure if two people is enough or if we needed three for a quorum. And with Jerry missing in action, harder to get the answer to be sure.
Right? We can get ourselves into a lot of trouble.
Yep. So I know Jennifer's dialing in right now, so that we know for sure we're safe with three of us.
Brian, can you all see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Yeah, because I can't see anybody. I'm on my iPad.
Yeah, I'm on my iPad too, and the only person I see is whoever's actively talking last.
Okay. All right. Okay, yeah.
Let's see.
So that's why my iPad is set up to who's ever talking, I see.
Yeah, I'm tapping all over because I swear at one point in time they used to let us have like a row of boxes across the top of the iPad.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it was. But I can't see where it gives me that option to.
I'm looking all over for it now because I remember that too.
It might not be available since John is sharing his screen.
Ah, that makes sense.
Okay, well, let me know when we get ready. I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you, Jose.
I did hear from Jerry, we don't actually need a quorum for a committee meeting. And since this action is just to bring a proposal forward for the full board review, it's, we could have proceeded, but we have 2 members, so we can wait for the full 3, whatever your
So,
desire is.
Were we waiting for Jennifer to join? I thought I saw. No, she joined.
Kelvin just said
Yeah,
right before you popped on, she was joined. There she is. Okay, I see Jennifer popped in there. In that case, let's go ahead with the, if everybody else is ready, we'll go ahead with the Risk Management Committee meeting and start with a roll call.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Trustee Raymaker, Trustee Melendrez,
Present.
Trustee Haran,
I know she's here. Oh, she just got disconnected.
okay, and Chair Wilson.
Here. And we'll just go ahead and continue and then mark it when she reconnects.
Okay.
On that note, do we have anyone for public comment?
No, we don't have any public comments.
Awesome. And looking at the agenda, just go ahead and accept the agenda. In favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And let's see, new business. This discussion and possible committee action regarding a report from the district's broker of record regarding recommendation for contract award for property and casualty insurance and public officials and employment practices liability insurance for the policy year commencing July 15th, 2022.
Good afternoon, trustees. John Vino, General Services Director for the record. Joining me today is Brandon Lewis, Vice President of Commercial Property and Casualty, as well as Jennifer Fryer, Commercial Operations Manager for USI Insurance Services. This afternoon, we are requesting possible committee action regarding the district's property and casualty insurance, and public official and employee practices liability insurance policies, which renew July 15th, 2022. USI Insurance Services conducted a thorough review of the district's current policies and coverages. They solicited competitive bids and prepared a proposed insurance package and recommendation for contract award. Brandon Lewis and Jennifer Fryer will be making a presentation of their proposal and discuss staff's review and recommendation of contract award. The Risk Management Committee will bring forward a recommendation for contract award to the Board of Trustees at the June 9th meeting. We will be happy to answer any questions which may arise. I'll change from the agenda to the package, if I might. And then Brandon, when you're ready.
Sounds good. Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. Brandon Lewis here from USI, also joined by my colleague, Jennifer Fryer. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week at the board meeting itself. As John mentioned, we did do a thorough review and a comprehensive marketing this year. The insurance markets the last few years have been challenging. We've seen a lot of steady increases for public entities and government entities. The library district has been fortunate in the sense that you're with a package carrier called Travelers, and they've really worked with us the last few years. They have kept rates flat or very close to flat when the market was going up 10, 15, 20% or more. So those in the last few years, we very much felt confident saying this is better than the market, and we recommend renewing with the incumbent. This year, talking with Mr. Vino and his team, based on the market and the fact that it has been a few years, especially for Travelers, we decided it was best to do a full marketing effort to check with the insurance companies that could consider your type of entity. And so we have the results of that. I know John provided the proposal document up on the screen there. Thank you. If I know everybody may have a copy, but if you'd like to go to the marketing summary, John, on page 3, thank you. This just starts to list out the carriers that we approached. One couple pages back, John, please. This lists the carriers that we approached, and you'll see at the top are most of the incumbent markets that quoted. And towards the middle of the page, you'll see a number of other markets that we approached for what we call the package. It's your property, liability, auto, management liability, which is sort of the board, public officials coverage, and umbrella coverage. That's where the bulk of your coverage is with Travelers currently. Philadelphia did provide a quote, but they weren't competitive. You can see towards the middle of the page on the right, it says quoted, total premium $392, but the most they could offer for flood and earthquake was $5 million each. And that compares with Travelers. If you jump up to the top of the page, Travelers renewal for those lines was $356, maintaining your $15 million general flood limit and $25 million in earthquake. So even with lower flood and earthquake limits, they had a higher premium. We did receive a number of declinations from other markets that you can see: Liberty Mutual, Hartford, American Specialty, and Safety National. And it goes on to the next page for a couple more, right? Specialty and a few others. We are seeing a real increased scrutiny in underwriting. We're really seeing a lot of underwriters sometimes not even able to review something. They're getting so strict on their guidelines and what they can write, whether it's in a fire, flood, earthquake zone. And so a number of these carriers, 10 years ago, I would have expected to quote, but right now everybody's being really selective in terms of the capacity that they can offer. But we were glad to see Philadelphia. They really wanted to give us a good quote. They just couldn't be competitive this year. So that's a broad overview of the marketing summary there. If there's any questions, we'll be happy to address those. Jennifer, would you note any other items on the marketing summary? I know Jennifer was a huge help on this year. Is there anything else you would note?
No, the only thing I would note there is that where we noted the self-insured retentions, you might have a couple other markets that would quote, but you currently don't have any self-insured retention on your liability. And so you would be going from a 0 retention up to a 250,000, which also that would not make sense for the district as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's a good point. Those few markets, mostly on page 4, were excess markets that we checked with, and they would require that self-insured retention where you'd have to manage the claims. And usually the challenge there is the minimum premiums are prohibitive for a smaller entity. So, Clark County, for example, can have a 1 million, 2 million or higher retention, and they won't hit that minimum premium. But it's just something to be aware of, in the future, depending on how the insurance markets go. It's another route, another approach. Thanks, Jennifer. The next page goes into the premium summary for the recommended carriers, and you can see at the top, just left and right, expiring and renewal with Travelers. The total insured values, that number at the top, not a premium, but it just kind of shows you the total property values that we're insuring did trend up a bit. And you can see the premiums down below. We are still seeing general rate increases in the industry. We're seeing a lot of property programs increase 10 to 15%. Liability carriers that we're getting renewals on for other public entities are pushing for 10 to 20% rate increases. So Travelers, we feel, did really work with us, even though the rates are still trending up. And they came in competitive versus Philadelphia. Chubb quoted the crime renewal up a bit there at 6505. Cyber, right in the middle of the page, is probably the most challenging market right now. And it's been challenging since COVID started and leading up to that. But in the last few years, it's gotten so tough. The underwriters now won't release quotes more than 30 days ahead. So since yours is a July 15th renewal, they haven't released it yet. We're pushing them since we have the board meeting next Friday. We really want to have this number finalized. But the 18,000 is based on our conversations with the market and with the brokers for that, is a conservative estimate. It should come in within that number. You'll see it's a big increase from the 11,700 last year. Most of the quotes I've been getting have been for a 50 to 100% increase in cyber. So we're very much hoping will come in, much less than 18,000. The rest of the policies, some of them get very specific. There's a tank environmental liability policy. The premiums trending up to about 1,100 this year for gas and diesel tanks at Windmill. Then there's the kidnap and ransom policy and the active shooter coverage. And this, I know we've had good discussions over the last few years with the risk committee and the board. These are two separate approaches to this type of risk. But I think as the board's looked at it over the years, it made sense to carry both. The kidnap and ransom is a traditional kidnap and ransom policy. It has, coverage if there is a kidnap event involving an employee, a family member, a patron, or there could be an event on site. If someone had a bomb threat or was trying to hold hostages, God forbid. But this policy, we note, also includes threat response. It has a couple specific endorsements giving you coverage. There's 100,000 if you have a threat and you have additional security costs. Let's say for the next few weeks you want to beef up security at a branch. This would actually help pay for that up to $100,000. And then there's a $500,000 limit for assault threat coverage after an event happens to help with some of those initial coverages. The active shooter policy is a wholly different approach to that. We have a little more detail in the proposal later, and we'll go over that because it's got some kind of specific notes to it, if that's okay. And then the last one we call a TULIP. It's your tenant user liability and third-party property damage policy. There's no premium for the district, and this has been in place for a few years. And I think Jennifer mentioned yesterday, we were talking to Mr. Vino, the activity's really ramped up. It can be a really nice benefit for other parties, small organizations, individuals, and families that are using one of your spaces where you require insurance. This provides them a very cost-effective way to buy it online, and it protects them and the district. And so that shows a $0 because there's no cost to the district on your list there. So that's it. That's the overview for the premium summary. We'll be happy to answer any questions on that. And then Jennifer, would you mind noting on page 6? I know there's a few items that you had noted, and then the options on the 3 years for the kidnap and ransom.
Yes, sure. So I just kind of noted there at the above that we increased the property values, as Brendan mentioned, on about 5% from last year. The inland marine, we increased our scheduled equipment limit from 31,000 up to 106,700. And then we talked about the cyber. And we did get you a couple options on the kidnap, ransom, assault, threat coverage. And so if you did want to bump up those limits this year, you can see what the premiums are for that. And then below it just breaks down the exposure summary increases from expiring term to the renewal. So you can see where you might have increased versus where you're flat. And so this comes into play with the underwriting of the premiums.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good point. The next page just goes into the location schedule. You know, of course, with the most recent and East Las Vegas Library toward the bottom, and we have noted at the bottom the future site. For liability coverage, it's automatic in the sense of if you have a parcel or a premises that the district owns, you have liability coverage for it. It's when you start to actually have construction, building improvements, that's when we'll talk to Mr. Vino and his team about builder's risk and making sure the district is protected there once construction starts. And then the rest of the proposal, the next few pages goes into the property in a bit more detail. In general, we have what we call a blanket limit on the property. You'll see a $296 million limit. That means that if you have a building reported for $3 million replacement cost and it's complete loss and it costs 50% more than that to rebuild it, they're going to pay it because it's within that $296 million. It makes it nice so you don't have to worry about an individual building, whether it's overvalued or slightly undervalued. The only exception is Mount Charleston Library. That one does have specific limits, and a lot of that's driven by the insurers really upping their scrutiny on wildfire zones and wanting to limit their liability there. And it just goes down through the line, coverage for art on loan and on display. There's a floating limit of 400,000, and generally we'll get updates on those throughout the years on the new exhibitions that are within that number. And if we ever had one that was more significant, we could certainly adjust the coverage. No other major changes on here. Just, please let me know if anybody has any specific questions. The earthquake at 25 million, the flood at 15, except for Mwapa Valley at 2.2. But other than that, no major changes on the property. And then John, unless, I don't want to skip anything, but unless there's specific questions,
I'll just
we
go.
have the inland marine. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, we'll just go down, just a summary of each of the policies is fine, unless anybody
Okay.
has a specific question.
Okay. And I'll just, on the property, the deductibles, 5,000 in general with higher deductibles for quake and flood. This is the inland marine. This is kind of a combination coverage. It's for your scheduled equipment. It could be a scissor lift, forklift, boom lift, that kind of thing. But this is also where we have coverage for some miscellaneous and other scheduled equipment here. In the fine arts, you'll see right in the middle of the page, coverage for the district's fine arts. Your schedule there is covered under this form. And that includes earthquake and flood, just with a little higher deductibles of 10,000. And there you go, John. Thank you. The general liability with travelers, no major changes. There is a 2 million occurrence limit and 2 million aggregate, and this sits underneath the excess coverage that we'll show you. Normally, travelers limits abuse and molestation, usually they'll limit that to 1 million, but several years ago when we wrote your account, we were able to get them to give you the full 2 million primary limit for that coverage. And we're seeing a lot of pressure there, mostly on school districts. Washoe and Clark in the last year had multi-million-dollar settlements for this type of loss. So it's really pushing the underwriters, but Travelers was able to keep that there. No deductible on the liability, as Jennifer mentioned earlier. for general liability coverage, and no other major changes here. Next page just goes into a little bit more on the general liability and include who's insured. It's very broad to cover elected and appointed officials, board members, employees, the entity, and a number of endorsements that are written really specifically for public entities with travelers. And then a couple pages later goes into the auto. No changes here, right, Jennifer? I'm not aware of any. Thank you.
That is correct.
And so we've got what we call coverage for any auto, whether it's owned by the district, whether it's rented, whether it's an employee vehicle, the district's coverage applies. If an employee drives their personal vehicle, their coverage is primary for them, but the district limits are in there to protect you. We have comprehensive and collision coverage down below for scheduled vehicles and hired rented vehicles with $1,000 deductibles. And there's some items down below you'll see like rental reimbursement. Honestly, that's pretty limited. It's 30 days, $30 per day, 30 days max. So that, wouldn't necessarily cover the full cost of a larger vehicle or a truck. But we've looked at it in the last few years. I think this year we talked about it, John, and it's not necessarily something that is a key point on the coverage in terms of pricing or what they're offering, but it's in there a little bit. And then next page is the vehicle schedule, which thanks to the staff, we help keep up to date. And just a couple pages on the coverage. And then there's the management liability. Think D&O for private entities. This is public officials liability for board members, committee members, and employees. Really an errors and omissions coverage. If there's a claim that it doesn't talk about bodily injury or property damage, there may be a claim alleging, a decision of the board or a committee, financially harmed the district or financially harmed the community, and there's a claim that results out of that. This is where we would look to the coverage. And these are $1 million primary limits, but we do have excess over that we'll show you. And you do have a deductible here. It's $50,000 for this coverage. A couple pages later goes into the second aspect of this, which is employment practices liability. This is where you have claims that may arise for wrongful discrimination, harassment, discrimination, even just failure to hire or promote, those types of claims that would go before NERC in Nevada. That's where we would report these here for potential coverage. And again, they're $1 million limits with a $50,000 deductible. And then the umbrella excess, right here, you'll see 20 million limits. So all the limits we've been talking about so far for liability, this goes over those. So for general liability, we talked about a 2 million limit. This gives you access to 22 million limit. If there was a significant event, number of injuries, number of folks hurt or worse, this is the coverage where we would have it. The tort cap, which is going up this year from 150 to 200,000, does limit your state tort liability per person. But this is there, again, just in the event, I think, of a significant catastrophe or loss that involved a lot of folks, a lot of patrons. But this also goes over, you'll see at the bottom of the page, the auto, the management liability, the employment practice liability, and the employer's liability, which is actually on your workers' comp. So this gives you down below, most of them are one, so 21 million limits for any of those coverages. And most carriers won't apply the excess over the public entity management and the employment practices, but Travelers is one that does, specific for this program.
Brandon, I would point out here, though, that they are not sitting excess over the abuse and molestation. That coverage gets sublimited, yeah.
That's a good reminder. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, the sexual abuse molestation on the GL is just 2 million. That's a really good reminder. Thank you. And then after that, into the crime, really the coverage that drives this is at the top: employee theft and plan officials. This is the coverage they rate the coverage on, number of employees. We have $1 million limit with a $10,000 deductible. And the big thing I always like to remind folks is if you found out that an employee or a group of employees was stealing over 10 years and they stole $1 million a year, it actually comes into one one theft or one loss. So that limit can't be stacked. You would only get a 1 million limit because it was one long sustained crime. But the benefit is you only pay one deductible of 10,000. So when we look at limits, we always recommend just looking at those and making sure you're comfortable with that limit. Because if someone stole in a day or over 10 years, that million is all you get for that instance. And there's a number of other coverage in here. There's some ERISA coverage built in. You'll see on premises and outside the premises, money, securities, other property, stolen for theft type losses there, $1 million limit. Forgery of checks, money orders, and counterfeit money. A lot of these are built into the crime form, so they don't specifically charge for them. But once you rate that first coverage, these are built in. Coverage for computer systems fraud at $1 million. A couple of them you'll note have lower limits. So fraudulently induced transfers, we also call it social engineering. A few years back, we had a few carriers giving us $1 million limits for this coverage, but now everybody's pulled back significantly because they've been hit so hard on these not extortion, but these claims where they might trick your accounting department into paying a fraudulent invoice. And it's a real invoice, it's a real amount, but they pay it to the wrong party. So this sublimit here is only 50,000. Most carriers we're seeing in this 50 to 100,000 range for this coverage just because they've been hit so hard on it. And the controls there are the benefit. The controls that each organization has are really what's going to help be the front line to prevent those losses. Other than that, no major changes on the crime. And a couple pages later, we do have this grayed out a bit, and I apologize that in prior years, cyber carriers were difficult, but they still quoted, but now they're not willing to release quotes until 30 days out. We're going to push for it before the board meeting again, because it's important, to have some certainty there on the coverage and the cost. We have a few accounts renewing on July 1, and they finally released those quotes yesterday. So they're trying to stick to that, but we'll keep pushing on that.
Let me interject on that with a question real quick. This is Brian Wilson. If we can't get quotes in time for the July meeting, do we need to kick the can on this policy to a special meeting that is after June 15th to be within that 30-day window? I don't know, maybe if that's a question you answer or Mr. Vino has to answer, but if we can't get the info we need in time for next week, what's our backup plan? And let's make sure that we have that.
What we might do if we can't lock it in, we're pretty sure it's going to be at 18. I think the outside number was 25,000. So I could just word the motion up to, but not to exceed the slightly higher amount for this overall item. And then if it doesn't come in, or if there is a major change, we can get with Jerry on how to address it, if that would be acceptable.
It is for me. I'm sure the other board members will chime in with their opinion, but I figured might as well bring it up now since we haven't published next week's official meeting yet. If we really are tied around this 30-day window, we could always kick the whole meeting 1 week later in the month, possibly. So just let us know as soon as you know. Otherwise, I'm fine. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
Brian, this is Jose real quick. When you talk about pushing it, would that be the entire board meeting, or would there be another special meeting around specifically the risk management report?
Any of the above, whatever works for people.
Okay.
So, whatever anybody prefers.
Thank you. I'm just saying, because I know like next week, most likely I'm not going to be able to attend the meeting on the 9th, but just as an FYI.
Okay.
We certainly will try to get it locked in, and I'll check if we can get approval for a not to exceed that might be slightly higher, and I'll just include in my upcoming board report what the final numbers were, if they were within what we reported to the board.
Okay.
This is Kelvin Watson speaking. So I think that's the approach, John, that we should take. And then if the board agrees that the not to exceed is the way, and then if it whatever the number is, you just put it in your report, in your future report. That way you can at least get the approval up to an amount. If it's outside of that, then we discuss having a special meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's continue.
Go ahead.
That's good. Thank you.
Oh, Sandra, I
Hey.
see Sandra's got in with us. Just for the record, Trustee Raymaker has in the meeting.
Yeah, I've been in here for about 10 minutes, but that's okay.
Great. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Sounds good. And I realize it's grayed out a bit on the cyber, but in general, you'll see limits of $1 million with 25,000 deductible. We do expect those to hold pretty steady. The one area I'm seeing quotes, almost all of them come in as under extortion coverage towards the middle of the page. That's currently $1 million limit. I've had several quotes in the last few days where they dropped that from $1 million down to 250 or 100,000. And it's frustrating because that's, it's a two-edged sword. That's where the carriers are getting hit, but it's also where the insureds are getting hit. So it's where you need the coverage the most. So we're going to watch that very carefully when that comes in. Like John mentioned, if there's major changes, and we'll want to, address those to make sure we get the best options for you. All right, thanks, John. The environmental liability, we also call this the tank liability coverage. You can see in the middle of the page, the gas and diesel tanks at Windmill. This is some pollution liability coverage specific for those, because otherwise this type of coverage isn't provided by your general liability coverage form. And then the kidnap and ransom, I know we talked about quite a bit. This is a very broad policy. I like having it in place for a lot of our clients, because if you do have a traditional event, kidnap, ransom, or some sort of hostage situation, this is the type of policy where it's nice to have the $1 million limits, but the key really is there's a hotline that you call as soon as that event starts, and they have on retainer specialists that will work with you and law enforcement to help work through that situation. And that coverage in here is really unlimited. That's the real value of the coverage. Toward the middle of the page, you'll see the threat response coverage, $100,000 to help you with additional costs. If you have an actual threat, you report it and they can help you cover additional security costs. I think it's up to 30 days, Jennifer, I thought, but we've got the 90-day indemnity period here. So they may have expanded that. And then the assault expense is $500,000 per assured event. This is for costs the district may incur after an event happens, to help with just those immediate things. And really a lot of policies like this will see the limit like this. It's not, 10 million or 100 million. And really that's because it's just meant to help address immediate expenses. If the district is sued over an event, significant event that happens, we really would look towards your coverage with Travelers, that 22 million in general liability. That's where they would be defending you against claims, for negligence or legal liability.
90 days is correct, Brandon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
And then next page gives a couple definitions on threat response and assault expense that we mentioned right in the bottom of the page there. And then the next section goes into the, sort of the dovetailed other policy for this. There is probably some overlap here, but I think the board over the last few years has felt comfortable having both because of the premiums were reasonable. But this is active assailant coverage. And this is written a little bit differently. You'll see in the middle of the page, there's just a 1 million policy limit. So again, this isn't meant to cover the, significant legal claims that might come out for liability. But there's $1 million limit with a 25,000 deductible. And down below, you'll see a few items that they cover. One is public relations costs, 100,000, counseling costs, 10,000 per person, medical expenses per person, and employee retraining costs. And so these are really a benefit in the sense of those initial, those costs. So you can offer folks counseling, you can offer, immediate, medical help and payments to try to help people really. And ultimately, I think that would help mitigate, potential claims and lawsuits. And this coverage is pretty specific. There's a lot of terms. And I think one more page, John, if you don't mind, on page 37, right in the middle of the page are some key definitions for what an active assailant is, an active assailant event. And there's the definition actually references a handheld weapon. So you'll see that in the middle of the page there. And we would like to put this in there because they're going to look at this, of course, if there's an event. But it's one thing that's interesting is a handheld weapon does include a road vehicle. If someone does, use a vehicle to cause harm to a group at an event or an outdoor event, that's considered a handheld weapon in here. And then the last one is just that tenant user policy, the TULIP, again, no cost to the district, but this provides a nice way other parties can go online. It's a really nice website. They choose your location that's preloaded. They say what kind of event it is, how many people, and it loads a premium for them. And typically those premiums, I think, are in the range of $100 to $200, depending on the type of event. But that can be a lot less than going out and buying your own policy on a one-off basis. So that gives a broad overview. There's a few more pages with a summary of the carriers. You'll see there all very high financial ratings. USI has a market security group, and so we'll get notified if any one of these carriers during the year, if they start to slip, if there's an issue, we'll get notified, and our group will usually give us very specific guidance on, you need to let your client know. And a lot of times it's just an advisory, but there have been times, it happens rarely, thankfully, where we will notify a client and recommend replacing the coverage. So we're always watching these because we want to make sure you're with carriers that are going to be able to pay the claims if they come up later. I think that covers
where you are.
We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Trustee Raymaker.
Yes. I think this was just an awesome report. And the idea of putting in the whatever a certain rate and not to go above it is a great idea. And while I'm here, I want to thank Brian for taking over for me today. I appreciate it.
Glad to do it. Trustee Melendez. Trustee Duran. I see they're both still here on mute.
Yeah, I'm right here, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah,
so I just letting it all soak in. It looks great. I really love the added feature of having you really watching the companies carefully, so that's something that we know that we're going to be insured the insurance that we're looking for. So I really liked that aspect of it. But no questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. On that note, I have the full recommended action here in front of me. I don't know if you do, Trustee Raymaker.
I do not.
Okay, then if it's okay with you, I will go ahead and make the motion since I have it sitting right here. And motion to recommend to the Board of Trustees that a contract for property and casualty insurance and public officials and employment practices liability insurance be awarded through USI Insurance Services to Travelers, Chubb Federal Benchmark, Tokyo Marine Specialty, Great American, Indian Harbor, and Atlantic Specialty at an annual premium not to exceed $390,275.53 for the policy year commencing on July 15th, 2022, subject to final review by council.
I move to approve.
Okay. All in favor? I vote yay.
Aye.
Jose, aye.
Aye. And
that's
Huron, aye.
And that is unanimous. Motion carries. And from that note, what do we have left? Just public comment, I think, if there was any final comment. I think, here's my, no, that's it. On that note, any new public comment come in, Ebony?
No, there are no public comments.
Great, thank you very much. Then on that immediate note, I think to thank everybody very much, and we are adjourned.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.